Good evening and Happy New Year. Thank you. Welcome to the Board of Selectmen's meeting, Wednesday, January 2nd, 2019, McAuliffe Hearing Room. All members of the board are present. We are actually going to shift things a little bit around on the agenda tonight, so I hope you will all bear with us. One of the members has a prior obligation, so we're going to try to get through what we can. So we are going to move up members' report from under reports C. And I just wanted to give a little information on this, that you'll notice there's a new category on the Board of Selectmen agenda. It's members' report. It's going to be there going forward. This was created to give all members of the board the opportunity to share updates of meetings attended, items for future discussion or future events, share experiences in town, or items of interest to the board. Items mentioned in this section have not been voted nor discussed with the board. It's very similar to the chairman's report. It gives the opportunity for members of the board to share information, comment, and community. So many things happen, good and bad, that should be shared with the board and the public, that this is just another avenue to improve transparency. So, with that being said, does anyone have anything they would like to share? Mr. Shea.
I would just offer the first item. This coming Saturday, January 5th, the Southborough Neighbors for Peace will be sponsoring a candlelight vigil for peace and unity at St. Mark's Field at the corner of Routes 30 and 85. That's starting at 4:30 on Saturday. So we hope that as many people in town as possible can attend that. Again, Saturday, January 5th at 4:30 in the afternoon.
Wonderful. Thank you, sir. Mr. Kalinda.
Things.
All right, you have the floor.
And so, good and less good, but so you weren't here at the end of a meeting a couple meetings ago, and so I was acting chair, and I just wanted to, there was an uncomfortable incident at the end of that, and I just wanted to, I had some comments I wanted to make about that, and then I have another matter that I'd love to talk about. But during the public comment period of this board on December 4th, 2018, a situation occurred where a resident, during that period of comment, proceeded to the microphone with a sign and began to make several inquiries relative to the financial issues of the town, a subsequent town manager position, and the maintenance of minutes for ministerial purposes by the board. Decorum was advised prior to the commencement of comment, pursuant to guidelines established by the Board of Selectmen, but unfortunately, they were not followed. This is clearly not the longstanding tradition of this town, but it is now a more recent tactic utilized by some to slander or question the ethics and integrity of citizen volunteers. The comparison to the deranged leader of Germany in the 20th century who was responsible for mass genocide to me, a United States military officer and selectman, was thoroughly uncalled for and exceeded expected standards of polite comment. Suggesting that this board broke the law on ministerial record keeping sensationalizes the issue. I am sorry that the incident occurred, and I'm sorry that I became visibly upset with the resident, but the reference was so incendiary, so inflammatory that heightened emotion, as it can, resulted. I'll even note when I got home that night, my beautiful mother-in-law said to me, Dan, you should, next time when that happens, just smile and say thank you and move on. And maybe that's the best course of action, but it shouldn't even come to that. We are one town. We can disagree, but there are better words and comments to express citizens' discontent. The maintenance of courtesy, decorum, and mutual respect cannot be allowed to erode. When we talk at or over each other or resort to name-calling and attempts at character assassination, we fail to hear each other. It is my hope that in 2019 and beyond, we all listen to each other more, respect each other more, and work together more to move our town forward in a manner that we can all be proud of. Madam Chair.
Thank you. If I may just add something to that, thank you. And I could not agree more that we need to do better in working together in the future to treat each other's with different views, with the respect and dignity that we all deserve, not just as citizens, but as neighbors. These are values that we all must observe and strive for. I believe Southborough is defined by the generosity we all show to others through kindness and support. I, for one, will take your message regarding kindness in the new year to heart, and I will myself will work harder to bring community and respect back. So I thank you for your comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I did have, in the spirit of all that is good, I referenced John Wilson. So as you all know, Mr. Wilson has been a member of this community for decades and served our town government as town moderator for years. Was always a voice of calm, and reasoning. John has been serving our American Legion. He's been at every, and presiding over all of our Veterans Day events, our Memorial Day events, and I would love to see and suggest to this board and this community, our town, that we do something demonstrable in his honor. Many people do serve for many years. He has been a citizen soldier and has served with incredible distinction, volunteered on so many boards and committees, even well after he was town moderator, served as our veterans agent. And so I guess what I'm asking is if the board members can think of ideas of what they've seen elsewhere. Maybe Mr. Purple or Ms. Hale has seen things that have done to honor people. I'd love to have some ideas that we could talk about at a future date and a way to honor a wonderful man.
I could not agree more. I think that was very well said. And if the board does have any comments, or maybe if we could get it together for our final meeting in January, we can put it on the agenda. And if the board is willing, we can certainly discuss that. But I'm more than happy to put it on the agenda to further the discussion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's all I had.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Calendar. I think that evening is behind us, and we have just the future to look forward to in this community with respect for each other, and let's not repeat it, whether it's this side of the table or as an audience member.
Well said.
Well said. Any further? All right.
And I am the one, if anyone's curious, I do have another commitment. So if I may at some point, Madam Chair, need to, or ask to excuse myself.
Absolutely, thank you. Next, we are going to bring the consent agenda, the items up on the list. Do we have any holds?
February 25th and April 8th, before Mr. Calendar leaves, since he was the only member at that time still present.
Okay, do you want to hold them, Mrs. Faniff, or okay, so February 25th and the second?
April 8th.
April 8th, okay, thank you very much. Do we have any other holds? Okay, then, do we have a motion for approval of open session meeting minutes, December 18th, 2018, December 27th, 2018, approval of limited, I can never say this word. The word?
Revocable.
Revocable. I always say it wrong. It's like aluminum, sorry. Revocable license for 84 Main Street. Assignment of December 27, 2018, open meeting law complaints from Attorney Lawler to Town Council for review and response. Approval of executive session meeting minutes, December 18th, 2018, September 12th, 2018, December 5th, 2018, January 18th, 2018, January 2nd, 2018, December 19th, 2017, December 5th, 2017, and release of executive session minutes for calendar years 2013 through 18 per the attached list. Discussion.
moved.
Okay.
Second?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
So if you're going to hold those 2 minutes that Mrs. Faniff noted, then those minutes would need to be, then the vote
Oh.
on E needs to reflect that those minutes are obviously not going to be
The
released.
released. So noted. There's
They're
no
on the,
list.
so on the sheet that you have, if you flip your agenda over,
There's the updated list.
trying to save paper, sorry.
Okay.
Okay? So with that amendment,
All right, can I explain? The only reason I held them was that Mr. Calenda was the only member today that is mentioned in these minutes. I wanted to give him the opportunity to review them.
And I'm fine with them.
You're fine, okay,
Yes.
all right.
Thank you.
So just to clarify then, there's no hold?
No hold.
Okay.
I move that we add the minutes from February 25th, 2014 and April 8th, 2013 to item D, consent item, to be acted on as well.
So essentially, items A through E are being voted as presented.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
It just makes it easier for Katie.
Sorry, Katie.
Second?
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
With that being said, scheduled appointment, Chief Paulus, recommendations for appointments, and John Vasikas, sir, please, come on forward. And I don't know if I'm saying the last name right? Vosikas, I was close. As a student officer effective January 30th, 2019, and Brittany Remillard as a part-time communications officer effective January 3rd, 2019. Sir, the floor is yours.
So I'll start first with Mr. John Vasikas. That's for the opening that town meeting approved. It was supposed to start September 1st. We made him a conditional offer back in August. Unfortunately, the state has a dearth of academy openings, so we had to wait. He'll actually be starting the academy on February 4th, but we thought it was worth the wait. He's currently a resident of Northbridge, Mass., holds a Reserve Academy certification, and he's employed as a campus office over at UMass Memorial in Worcester. He also holds a bachelor's degree in criminal justice from Northeastern, which is impressive. We brought him in. He's done numerous ride-alongs. He seems to fit in very well with the department. So we're looking to start him a few days before the academy on January 30th, and until he's done the academy, he'll be starting at a rate of $700 per week.
Sorry, thank you. I just had a question. Does anyone have any questions for Chief Paulus?
No questions, just a motion that we vote to approve the appointment of John Vasikas as a student officer effective January 30, 2019.
Thank you, sir. Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, thank you. All right, Chief. Brittany Remillard as part-time communications officer.
Yes, we're looking to expand our part-timers. Unfortunately, we had John Thorburn, retired fire chief in Weston. He submitted his resignation for retirement, so he was with the department almost 10 years. He'll be sorely missed. We're looking to replace his position. We had Miss Remillard apply for the position. She's a Milford resident, currently enrolled in the criminal justice program at Worcester State, and Mr. Calenda will like this. She's currently a citizen soldier in the Army Reserve. I believe she's based out of Reading. And also, she comes fully trained. She's a part-timer over in Hopkinton as well.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'd also just like to add our best wishes to Mr. Thorburn for his years of service to the town. He's been a pleasure to deal with over the years. So
Yes,
please
he will.
share that with him as well.
He will be missed.
Absolutely. Questions, comments?
Only a motion, Madam Chair, that we move to approve the appointment of Brittany Remillard as a part-time communications officer effective January 3rd, 2019.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you, Chief.
All right. With the board's indulgence once again, other matters properly before the board, we're going to move B, which is discussion with the Fire Chief Screening Committee, update of search process, review of fire chief job description, revised posting for position, and proposed revisions to the FCSC charge. So we're going to move that up on the agenda. So, Mr. Malinowski, welcome.
Thank you. Happy New Year to all of you. We met in executive session on December 11th to update you on our progress. Those minutes have since been released. But if you'll allow me a minute just to recap for the public that maybe doesn't go and pull down the minutes of where we stand in our process. As you'll recall, we reported to you that while we did receive numerous quality applicants, the quantity was not enough for us to bring forward a diverse group of candidates for you to make a selection on, and that's assuming that they were successful successfully able to complete background checks and go through an assessment center. So based on the discussion we had that evening, we all agreed, based on the unanimous recommendation of our committee and the unanimous vote of your board, of those that were present, that we would go out and repost the job description. The purpose of why we're here tonight is obviously if we go out with the same job description, we're probably going to come back with the same results. So we've worked with our consultant over the time since we met with you to really come back with a few recommendations for your consideration. We think it is incredibly important that we have your support on these recommendations before we go back out with the posting, before we do that, because we don't want to jeopardize the process on the back end if you weren't in agreement with kind of some of the recommendations we're going to make tonight. Of course, if your vote chooses to accept the recommendations, then we'll proceed as planned. If your board wants to deviate on one or more, I'm going to bring forward 5 recommendations. Some are far more straightforward than others. We will adjust our plans to make sure that it matches, what you're looking for in a candidate. I provided with you a detailed memo from our consultant that was addressed to myself as the chair of the committee. Our committee met this morning and voted unanimously on the recommendations in there. Those recommendations, for the public's benefit, were based on their interviews with senior fire officers that are looking for career advancement. And it was basically a series of questions that they asked them of why they didn't apply to the town of Southborough job opening. Simple things as, did you know the job was open? Did you know you were going to be moving into a brand new facility? And other more complicated questions like salary, residency, and strong chief, the fact that the position falls under the strong chief law of the state of Massachusetts. With that, they came back with 5 recommendations that, like I said, our committee has unanimously voted in favor of. What I'll do is I'll walk through 1 through 5. There's probably 2 that you're going to want to really entertain some discussion on. We'll have some dialogue on that, and then we're going to have some proposed changes to our charge on the back end of that, just to align everything, and I'll also provide you kind of what we think the timeline is between now and these candidates appearing before you for actual interviews and appointment. Before I go through the recommendations, I think there's one final thing that I really want to stress is none of these recommendations would change our view on the candidates that have been dismissed from the process to date. These are the goal of this is to increase our candidate pool. It's not to lessen the qualifications by any means. If anything, we're trying to strengthen some of the qualifications that we're looking for to kind of bring our next leader of the fire department in. So I just want you to keep that in mind, is we're not doing this to kind of open back up the field. We're looking at it to bring a more diverse pool to you that we think fits the mold of what you're looking for and to allow you some choice going forward. So I'll read verbatim the recommendations. Recommendation number 1 is to indicate in the revised advertisement and in the ideal candidate profile that the town encourages innovative and creative external applicants. Obviously, this needs to be tactfully created to not create an internal concern. Recommendation 2, include information relative to the construction of the public safety complex in both the revised advertisement and in the ideal candidate profile. A link to the current status of the project should be included in the ideal candidate profile and added to the MRI website. MRI is our consultant. Recommendation 3, adjust the salary range and indicate in the revised advertisement that the salary is up to $150,000, depending on the qualifications. Recommendation 4, communicate that the town is seeking stable long-term leadership. And recommendation number 5, clarify residency within approved residential radius is required within 18 months of the date of hire. And they strongly recommend increasing the residency requirement to be 15 miles border to the town of Southborough. My guess is you probably want me to expand a little bit on recommendation 3, which is the salary, and recommendation number 5, which is the residency, in the rationale behind those recommendations. Did any of the others pop out at you as needing explanation of what we're going to do a little differently next time?
No, not for me.
Oh, one,
You
I
got
have a
one.
question.
Bonnie?
Why is it necessary to advertise the fact that the town of Southborough is building a new public safety building when our priority would be protection of the residents and the employees would be, as far as I'm concerned, more important than the fact that we have a new station.
So if you look at the amount of hours that both fire chief and police chief have had to put into that project, not only the current chiefs, but their predecessors, those are hours that I would argue are going to be going back into their schedule to focus on, one of our main items that we've said, we hope you look for when interviewing these candidates in terms of finding someone that will develop a tremendous succession plan and management development program for the current command officers and those that aspire to be command officers within the department. So it's really, if you kind of look at some people that are looking for chief's job, they don't want to be spending most of their time building a station. They want to be spending it developing the men and women that are on the street every day. So I think it lines up to what you're asking. It's just going to be extra hours that are going to be devoted elsewhere. There's only so many hours in a day.
I'd probably put it fourth on my list then.
Okay.
I don't think we're in the position of marketing a building. I understand what you're saying, time, but moving ahead, that's done. So I'm really looking for a manager.
Well, right, and we're basically saying you
Okay.
really have no excuse to not be focusing on the management aspects of the department. All right, so let me start with the
Hold on one
resident.
second, Jason, sorry. Mr. Kalenda, did you have something to add? Okay, I apologize. Go
All
ahead.
right, so let me start with the residency first, and we'll come back to the salary. So as you recall, the job posting that went out, which was based on your vote at an early October meeting, required said chief to move into the area, and the area was defined as a town adjacent to a town that's contiguous to the town of Southborough. Said another way, 2 towns out from from this community, any which way, north, south, east, or west. What we are recommending is that you bring this in line with what we currently have for our police chief, which would bring it 15 miles border to border and also lines up with Mass General Law. As a firefighter myself, I originally paused and said, well, I think fire chief is different than police chief in terms of the nature of the emergencies that they're required to respond back for that are not during, I'll call it, business hours. But at the other time, I also looked at the struggle that we had to obtain the right diverse group of candidates to bring forward. And I think that by opening the residency pool wider, it will give you, an understanding of what type of candidates are out there, as opposed to limiting it from the beginning. In addition, I'll call it the most surprising feedback that we got from our consultant is most of these people that were interviewed, they indicated a strong desire, if they were to be interested in the town of Southborough position, they would actually want to move to the town and be part of the community. That's why we went with the 18 months to move as opposed to the 6 to 12, right? Someone just wants to get their bearings. They want to understand who their bosses are, what the landscape is, what the department's like before they pick up a family and move. That's why we think the 18-month requirement is not as much of a discussion point as whether you change from what you've currently voted to the 15-mile radius. So I'll pause there and see if there's any questions on the residency.
The 15-mile radius, that border to,
Border to border.
so unless I'm completely misinterpreting what you're saying, it could be anywhere 15 miles from any border.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I believe Mr. Purple
thank you.
has a map for you of what that would do to your,
Thank you. I'm just trying to imagine, if I think of like the western part of the state, and 15 miles from that border is in the middle of nowhere. So I'm just trying to understand.
yeah, it's flying.
it's-
It's flying. It's not
These are
driving.
air miles?
It's air miles.
Okay. So this is what the new, or is this the old?
That's what the new would look like.
This is what the police chief has, okay.
So while you look at the map, I think
Yes.
the discussion that our committee also had was, the salary number probably jumped when I said it too. I wasn't actually looking up when I said it, but I'll go into why we think that might be something we throw out there, but it's also a negotiation tool for you down the road that once you pick your candidate, maybe you have a salary that is if they choose to live wherever they are within that 15-mile radius versus maybe there is an incentive for living in Southborough or X community, you pick whatever radius you would choose. Therefore, they're complying with what we post in the job, but at the same time, potentially incentivizing if some of you are on the fence of whether you want someone closer or further away. I also noted, just looking at having the pleasure of working with Chief Paulus on the Public Safety Building Committee and just seeing what he does for the community overall. I don't know that you would know that he doesn't live in the town of Southborough unless he told you where he lived. And I just think any good leader makes themselves part of the community, regardless of maybe where their home actually is. So I think, that was also a strong consideration that certainly came to me, but like I said, the unanimous vote of our committee was also supportive of that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Shea.
So you had mentioned in describing this that it was also consistent with Mass General Law. Could you expand on that as to which law?
So we were advised by our consultant, and I don't know if town council has the statute. We were advised by our consultant, there's definitely conflicting views out there on how much it applies, but it definitely applies for police chiefs. Some communities have contested whether it applies for fire chiefs. But there is a statute out there that says 15 miles border to border. Thank you. I didn't have that one written down on my piece.
4199?
Okay, thank you.
So I guess any questions on residency before I go into the rationale around the salary?
Mrs. Faniff.
Are you saying it was a financial decision as well, or just the relocation of a family, or getting
I think
used
it's
to the
both.
community?
So a lot of them indicated that even when you open up bordering towns that may have different costs of living than the town of Southborough does, they felt it was very important that if they were going to become chief of the town, they actually wanted to try to live in the town, not a bordering community, because they felt like if they're going to already live just a town over, why not live in the town? So they thought that potentially additional financial consideration would alleviate that burden on their financial status. Also, if you just look at what it takes to potentially sell a house, depending on the age of children, if they're in schools, not in schools, and what else, or whatever else said individuals have going on in their life, that's why we went to the 18 months as opposed to the 6 to 12 months. I would argue these recommendations are all commingled together to bring you, well, start with us, a wider pool of candidates that we can then bring to you the best candidates that we think for the position.
I'm speaking for myself, I would be more comfortable extending it to the 18 months, but not moving the relocation outside what the original perimeter was. Because you're only talking one town. I just took a pen and drew what we suggested, and now you could live in Upton, but with the new 15-mile radius, air miles, that brings you to Sutton and Northbridge, so it's not really asking all that much.
Yeah, but I guess our argument would be if you have someone that already lives in Sutton, for example, you know,
I
and
could
you're
have somebody
eliminating.
that's living in Weston or Wellesley.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think we're worrying. I think we're looking at candidates that may be north, south, or west of here, maybe not as much east.
I'm going to speak as someone that has a little bit of experience about what it's like for a public safety official responding to an incident as a wife of a former fire chief. The expectation, my expectation, and what I've seen from my experience, is the safety of the personnel within that department is a priority. And to be on site during an emergency, whether it's CSX terminal in Westboro or some other incident that the town of Southborough has, I want a fire chief that can respond in a timely fashion to protect the men and women in the department and to protect this community. And that should be number one.
I don't disagree with any of that. I would just argue that you can get places pretty quickly in an emergency, and that's really what we're trying to do. Is I would argue, if that's important to you, that should vet in. If you have two candidates sitting in front of you, and one is a Southborough resident or a Westborough resident, and the other falls kind of on the outside as periphery, and you think they would both be great chiefs, and that's important to you, then I would go with the more local candidate. But don't limit the search before we bring you forward the candidates.
Then, all right, then I'll take it one step further. Then the expectation is that this individual responds to the calls, not pick and choose what's important, that they actually respond. They are a strong chief, working chief, and that's what I would expect.
I think that's a tremendous
We don't
interview
have-
question when they come in front
Right,
of you.
we do not have a large force, number one, and that individual is gonna be relied on as an EMT, paramedic, chief, officer in charge. I mean, we know the routine here. So I think I would prefer what we had decided. I am willing to extend it to the 18 months, if that's a comfortable range for someone. I'm only one vote here, but I have my concerns if we reach further out with a fire chief.
I agree to some point, Mrs. Faniff. I worry, as I worried initially when we had this discussion, that it's somewhat limiting of the pool, especially families. And I understand people move for their jobs all the time, and if your job's important, you do what you have to do. But I worry, as far as affordability, this area versus, say, a Millbury, a Sutton, a Northbridge. I worry in limiting it to the scope of just the contiguous towns. I guess I don't have as much of an issue with expanding it one town further. If it increases the pool of candidates to some degree, for me, it's all of the things you said, but it's also getting the best chief. And I know you feel the same way about that. I'm not saying you don't. It's getting the best possible person that we can get. And if expanding the pool to see if we get in a different caliber maybe, and into the process, I would be open to see that. Doesn't necessarily mean that that may or may not be the direction or the person that I would want to go with, but I think if it expands the pool, and maybe just being the new year and the time frame, I mean, we all read the report, it may have had something to do with it. I think 18 months is more than fair. I would be interested, just as a test, I guess, to see if it really would make a big difference in the pool of candidates that we get. That's just, again, I'm one person. I don't have the experience you have with having a fire chief.
It's not that experience. I know when we hired a police chief at one time, and I was party to that, and we brought the candidate pool down, and one of the applicants really wanted the job. And at that time, it was you needed to live in town or within this parameter, and the individual, actually, it was Chief Weber. He moved to Southborough. And he and I negotiated that, and it was a matter of, well, what's the benefit to moving to town? And my answer to him was, we're giving you a car. That is something you don't have to purchase. So, I mean, I'm not going to go back and forth on this. I think there's some negotiation here, and I do not want to get in a situation that the next board, who's ever sitting here, can't say at the end of 12 months, 18 months, you're moving to Southborough or you're moving to one of these adjacent communities.
So, I guess, because you're not privy to any of the names or
No.
qualifications of any candidate that we've vetted thus far, what I can tell you is we are asking very pointed questions on those that did not comply with the residency requirement that you've outlined to date, to make sure that that's not going to become an obstacle when they come in front of you as well. And we've gotten some pretty direct answers here. So I I think when you limit it to 2 towns around you, for example, you could have someone that lives just north of Hudson, for example. You can get here in less than 10 minutes from Hudson. I am a fire officer in a town that is 5 borders away from Southborough. I can be there in less than 20 minutes. I can hit some of the scenes before the actual on-duty crew can. That's what I came back to, is if someone was a fire officer, just lived in one of those communities, we don't have any to date, but I don't want to limit those if that's where they live. So you've kind of heard the rationale behind it. I'll leave it to you on the residency. I guess Madam Chair, do you want me to expand into the salary while folks think about the residency piece?
Yeah, and just one comment also on the salary piece, and I'm just curious, I'm going to try to draw a circle here quick on what a 10-mile or a 12-mile versus a 15. Because I think a 10 might expand it out a little bit further than we currently have it now. So I'm going to do a little drawing as you continue your next piece.
Okay. So on the salary, as a reminder, the current posting had Chief Morrow's current salary, which was just north of $125,000. It did not provide a range. What we have learned since we posted it is that is not the going rate for a fire chief in the town of Southborough or a town of that size. You can debate all you want whether you think that that's appropriate or not. What we have learned, and I'll give 2 examples. One, I have a town name, one I don't. The town of Carlisle is running a search concurrent with ours. They're about a month or 2 ahead of us. Carlisle is about half the size of this community. They have no union firefighters. It's all on call. They have no highways, no large commercial complexes within their town. They're hiring their first full-time fire chief ever. They have advertised a salary of $120,000 to $140,000 for that position. In addition, we learned this morning that there is a community about half the size of this town that is starting a fire chief search. That town has indicated a desire to go upwards of $140,000. Again, that town was described to us as a less desirable town to live in than Southborough, with no neighboring communities that offer any more affordability as well. So, like it or not, unfortunately, we're in what I would call a hot market for desirable candidates. So what we are asking your permission is to advertise up to, depending upon qualifications, and I would premise to you, right, you could use part of the qualifications as residency when you've picked your candidate down the road. There could or maybe should be stipends associated with that to get them to the max end if we go that far. We are willing to entertain other numbers, but we think re-advertising with the same $125,000 number will just be a waste of everyone's time and yield kind of the same pool that we're already dealing with that we have deemed not acceptable to move forward with.
Thank you. Comments?
Just one question. Jason, was it, were these recommendations unanimous?
So yeah, so the recommendations came from the consultant to us. Our committee voted unanimously on those recommendations.
Okay. You've got some pretty good number crunchers on your committee, and
Pretty fiscally conservative folks,
yeah,
I'd
and
argue
so
as
I
well.
was inquisitive, and I'm supportive of the recommendations, Madam Chair. I also think that expanding the possible pool of candidates would be wise, noting the challenges that we've had thus far. I like Ms. Phaneuf. I would like to see someone, maybe there would be preference for someone who was closer, but I'd like to see who we could get, and then at least we would hopefully then have options.
Mr. Schiffer?
I agree with the recommendation of the committee on board.
Thank you.
You know, again, by my rough hen scratching, it looks like it's about 50 communities that we're opening this up to beyond the current order that we have with the 2 adjacency, which is a, you know, significant number of communities when you look at a total of 350 or so statewide. So I think that does, and I certainly understand Mrs. Faniff's concerns as well, but, you know, appreciate your concerns as well, that, you know, not, this guideline that we initially set doesn't necessarily take into account the highway networks that connect some of the towns and make it easier to travel a longer distance. So I think I would be inclined to agree with the recommendations of the committee, both for the salary and for the, you know, again, for a range for the salary and also for the residency requirement.
And I also agree with what Mr. Shea said as well.
If I may.
Sorry, Mrs.
My
Faniff.
question was not in any way meant to limit finding the best candidate. I'm voicing my personal concerns. The funding mechanism. Do we have the funds available?
Mr. Purple.
You do not. You have the funds available at this point for the existing contract that you have with the fire chief. You have a town meeting coming up before you will be hiring this individual.
And it meets the window of hire?
I'm sorry.
We're gonna go out and advertise.
Do you want me to walk through the timeline now?
Is
Just
it
to-
gonna meet the timeline for the commitment for town meeting?
Yes.
Not sure so let me just walk through the timeline to make sure everyone's on the same page here. We expect to go out next week with whatever you concur with tonight.
Right.
We will leave the job out there for 4 weeks. That was strongly recommended by our consultant. Don't touch that. Don't try to shorten that. We will conduct interviews with we will then do a cut of the resumes and submissions again to make sure anyone that meets minimum qualifications and, you know, passes some preliminary background checks. Usually we'll bring them in for an interview end of February. We'll then vote on who proceeds to an assessment center. The assessment center will take place first week of March. We will then be ready for the board to entertain candidates in the 2 weeks prior to town meeting. So one of the things we're going to want you to think about, and you can answer tonight or you cannot, we're going to continue on our time frame, is do you want to interview while you're preparing for town meeting? If not, then these candidates will be before you once town meeting adjourns. You'll then select, assuming you select that same night, you still got to do a contract negotiation. I think it's highly unlikely that you're going to know a final first-year contract for this chief before you're making motions on town meeting floor.
I agree. So I think we need to know where we can encumber those funds or find them in the advisory board to cover this proposal.
So.
It's not gonna wait till town meeting.
No,
because that's
no,
until
so
July 1.
but you gotta remember, town meeting is prospective, so town meeting is gonna put funding in place that'll begin as of July 1st. And I apologize, Jason, I thought we were talking about the selectmen doing interviews of finalists just after town meeting, rather than just before, but you've given option A and
Either way, they're
and
not going to have a
option B.
contract, which I think is
So-
what I interpreted Mrs. Faniff's question as.
Correct, so if you, but I'm talking about making sure that the funding is available to give the board the latitude for the contract. So if you follow Mr. Malinowski's approach, interview the finalists before town meeting, make a decision before town meeting, enter into contract negotiations, reach successful contract with a new chief. That chief then gives notice. you're probably not gonna see anybody start until probably second week of May, you know, somewhere in that range. So you were gonna be looking to try and figure the difference
The window.
between, and again, Chief Morrow is retiring
Right.
March 4th. You are going to have some funding available, even if we bring somebody, or Chief Morrow, or someone else back to help with the interim piece of it. You're gonna have some funding available, which I think may close whatever gap you have for the last 6 weeks of the fiscal year before July 1.
All right, well, you need to give the committee that's working on this assurance that they have those funds, whatever that window is.
You need to decide what you want to do first on
No,
the.
but if it's up
and then,
to
yes.
is what was
Sure.
discussed, it
Once-
needs to be.
Right, once this board sets direction, then I can work with the finance team to ensure that that would be in place.
So that's all I have related to the job description, so to the extent, we would appreciate a motion either ratifying everything, or at least the portions that you're in favor or in support of. I realize you may break it into pieces, but we would appreciate a motion ratifying that, so that we can proceed with our work, and then I'll kind of proceed with the rest of our update.
Madam Chair, I would make a motion that we vote to approve the recommendations by the committee in their entirety.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you. So one more request for a motion.
Yep.
Our charge, which we were not involved, obviously, with the drafting of it, because this is what you use to then appoint us, expires on February 1st. So what we would like you to take action, I'm going to propose a few edits. I know the original charge was in your packet tonight. Essentially, what these changes are meant to do is to bring us through the conclusion of your process, i.e. your appointment of an individual, so that if you need to come back and reconvene at any point in time, we're already assembled, you're not going to be bringing us back, reappointing, swearing in, et cetera. You can choose how involved we are once we get to certain points. The one, what I would call major edit that we're requesting is it has been strongly recommended to us by MRI that the committee be involved with the assessment center. Our charge currently expires when we send 5 people to an assessment center. We're doing a heck of a lot of homework on folks now, to then put it in a consultant's hands for one day, which, let's face it, people have good days and people have bad days. Then that consultant would have been bringing you forward 2 or 3 names to bring forward to you. I think the consultant would greatly appreciate kind of the residential input of like, yeah, we're sending forward the right 2 to 3 folks to the Board of Selectmen, so that you kind of know that whoever you choose that night has the full backing of our committee. I'm not sure we can say that by just sending someone to an assessment center. So what these changes are really going to be meant to do is to allow us to observe the assessment center. There's going to be some very strict rules, but also be involved with the consultant. And our final report would essentially be the 2 to 3 names that we want you to interview. So with that, I would propose that you add a bullet saying that we will observe the assessment center under our charge. And then in the 4th bullet under the charge, strike the word semi and just have it say finalists, forwarded for final interviews as opposed to assessment center. And would ask under schedule that you extend our term to April 15th of 2019. And in the last sentence where it says committee members shall be discharged upon selection of the semi-finalist candidates, we'll say a finalist.
Jason, could we also add finalist candidates and final report?
Yeah.
Somewhere, we should add the final report in there as well.
And you're
My
welcome to
suggestion to
my
the board.
markup if any of you got confused by any of that.
Madam Chair, so moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so back to timeline. Thank you for that. Any view from the board of whether you want to see these folks prior to or after town meeting? Remember that if town meeting goes beyond that Saturday, you fall into Monday, Tuesday of the following week, so you're not looking till at least the end of that week, and you're gonna be pretty tired if town meeting goes beyond Saturday. So where are you falling on that one?
I think my preference would be, based on everything that leads into town meeting. For me, my suggestion would be after town meeting. Go ahead.
For fun, I'll offer a counter. And I think, our work has been done. Once town meeting is upon us, our work has been done. We've made recommendations, and it's up to the residents then. I mean, obviously, we're there and we're actively working and engaged during town meeting, but, town meeting is for the residents. And, I guess if I'd hate to see the process slow, and if there's, if we do have candidates and, we're able to, work it within our schedule, I'd love to move forward with that. Just because we're presented with an opportunity to interview doesn't mean that we're physically, administratively going to be able to. But I guess I'd like the option. I personally would say let's continue with the process and have the option if we can do it.
Fair enough.
I think we need to keep moving this forward. April, we also have April vacation week, so I don't think we should be,
Oh, well, I ended us April 15th, so.
no, but
Yeah.
things could change.
Yeah,
I think we should just keep this thing moving, and when you're ready,
okay. Well,
we'll be ready.
we'll keep the chair updated. Obviously, if we run into any more obstacles, we will call for another discussion. I guess the final thing I'll leave you with from a fire chief screening perspective is, I know I mentioned this to you in our executive session, but now that there's a little more eyes on this meeting than that meeting, you assembled a tremendous team with a very diverse views. But remember, everything I'm coming to is with unanimous consent. There's just tremendous professionalism amongst them, and I just want to commend you on the team that you put together and the views. And just especially Chief Paulus, and you'll see Chief Breen from Marlborough also is here, have just been tremendous assets to help us think about it. They were in this position before, as a candidate, right? And thinking about it from the candidate's shoes as well. And then I also just wanted to take the time to thank all of you for your support of our decisions and kind of helping us through this, and also the fire department for the outreach that they had to our process. While we actually haven't had to use any of that yet, it was important insight to us to kind of guide us as we kind of come closer to the finalists, and all of that feedback was kind of issued in our open meeting minutes. So I just wanted to thank them for the professionalism with which they approached what I would term a very difficult discussion of essentially who's going to be your next boss. So, thank you for that.
Thank you. And just for clarification, the board would prefer to move forward and not wait until just after town meeting. Okay. Just wanted to make sure that everyone, perfect. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.
And if you would hold on for just 1 second. I am going to briefly move the chairman's report up. I just wanted to share with the board and the community that I had the wonderful opportunity to tour the public safety building. It was quite an experience, being afraid of heights, I'll put it out there, and having to climb a ladder was very interesting and fun for me, but I was amazed at the work being done there, and actually being in the building and actually being able to see the layout of where things are going to be. It's marked on the floors, and being able to actually envision how it's going to be down the road was extremely worthwhile to me. It was a great opportunity for me, and I just wanted to say that it was great, and I appreciated the opportunity. And before Jason leaves, if he has anything that he might like to add regarding updates, whatever, on the building while you're here before we let you run.
So other than the chair's tremendous ladder skills, and I would strongly encourage any of you that want to take any subject, any portion of a tour, definitely bring boots, but it's still a very muddy site. We have resources down there to make that available to the board. The building continues to progress amazingly. You can see the progress. It's very visible from 85. What you don't see is what's happening behind the walls. Like the chair mentioned, you can actually see where the police chief's actually going to set up his desk now. It's that well framed, especially on the second floor, to actually see how this thing is coming together. It's crazy to think that in 6 months from now, we're gonna be opening this building. So a ton of work still to be done. No major budgetary issues that have come to light since I last reported out to you. We have developed a plan of, I'll call it accountability, with our owner's project manager, that there definitely have been some oversights by people who are paying money to do good work. And while the work has been great, there's naturally in a project of this size oversight, so in mistakes. So what we wanted to assure everyone of is that we're on it. And to the extent that stuff was missed and should have been caught sooner and is costing us more on the back end, we have kind of a plan in place to address that so that taxpayer funds aren't funding that. Some other source outside of the town is funding that. But we remain on track, well under budget, and it's really a tremendous site. And I just wanted to commend all the town officials that spend a lot of time down there. I get calls very frequently from various individuals with just, hey, I saw this today, what about this sort of thing? And I think you've got a very dedicated team working for you that's looking over this, not only the resident volunteer committee, but the town officials that you're paying. This is not part of their day job as much as they may go down there during the day because you can't see anything at night. They're having to put in a lot of time to make sure this thing gets done the right way so that we're not dealing with issues on the back end. So kudos to all of them. Nothing else substantive update other than tremendous progress.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Much appreciated. All right, next on the agenda, discussion of town council opinion on appointing authority for recreation employees. There's a letter that was in the packet that the board has. Town council gave an opinion on August 23rd, 2018, regarding the appointing authority for director, regular, and seasonal employees of the Recreation Commission. This came about with having the announcement of the retirement of the current director from the Recreation Commission. So the question was asked of town council because there seemed to be some confusion on where the authority on this lied. So,
Madam Chair, members of the board.
welcome.
Happy, healthy New Year to all of you, and a successful New Year for our town. Yes, I did render an opinion on August 23rd at the request of the town administrator relative to the appointing authority of the director of the Recreation Commission, regular and seasonal employees, as to be consistent with the state statute which regulates recreational commissions, and that is Chapter 45, Section 14. And I was also given some research that had been done, I think, by one member possibly of the commission who actually prepared that, or sent it anyway, to the town on New Year's Day at 10:42 p.m. So we looked, so that's diligence, and we looked at that. And we will give you just a quick overview, and then if there's any questions, we'll be glad to address them. Even looking at what was put together by that commissioner or that individual, the timeline is that in 1951, the Recreational Commission was established per Chapter 45, Section 14, the operational statute, by the town meeting. In 1966, apparently, the then town council determined that legal responsibilities and rights under Chapter 45, Section 14, again, included so-called hiring of personnel necessary to organize and administrate rec programs and activities. That was subsequently deleted, and in 1981, which is referenced in our code, the original article establishing the commission in the bylaws was amended to clearly indicate that the limitations of authority were those that you would find in Chapter 45, Section 14, again, the operational statute. In 2000, our opinion had to be rendered because there was some issue of whether or not an ad hoc committee, the Recreational Facilities Committee, was acting beyond the scope of its authority in conjunction with the authority of a recreational commission. And we did conclude that that ad hoc committee was in fact acting beyond the scope of their authority based upon the vested powers that were given to a recreation commission under the statute. In 2006, it was pointed out that we did a review of the form of rules and regulations which were incorrectly referred to as bylaws. And we responded to that in terms of the review of the form and indicated that they were in acceptable legal format. There was a reference to hiring, which is different legally than appointments. And we simply made our comments relative to those rules and regulations which do not supersede state statute. Then, in August, we were asked to, in effect, focus on the specific power to appoint the director and the employees of the commission. And in that regard, we gave a delineated opinion restating not only the reference in our bylaw to, again, Chapter 45, Section 14, but then by bullet point analysis, all of the authority that a recreational commission has to lease or buy property, to conduct or promote recreation, to construct buildings, or to provide equipment for recreation and playground purposes. The issue, however, was the appointment authority. And we reviewed Chapter 45, Section 14, which made no reference to appointment authority to the Recreation Commission, to a comparative statute, which was Chapter 45, Section 5, as it related to park commissions. And in that particular statute, that park commission entity had substantial authority, including appointment authority. So our legal analysis concluded that if the state legislature had not put that appointing authority as to individuals operating in the commission in Chapter 45, Section 14, and did put it in to Chapter 45, Section 5, then, in effect, that states a legislative intent that those powers are limited. So the conclusion was that the appointing authority of the Recreation Commission is the Board of Selectmen, and that the Board of Selectmen would have that implicit authority as they appoint the commissioners to also appoint the personnel. Now, that's not to say that the Board of Selectmen could not request input, recommendations, have initial evaluation done by the commission, and then simply make the appointment, and then have the commission carry forth in the hiring process the actual utilization of the people that have been appointed and then subsequently hired. And I got to tell you, we did this analytically. Rarely do you get a focus of a specific issue like this, but when you do, you have to call the law as you specifically see it, and that's the way we reviewed it.
Thank you. I have a couple questions for you, actually, just for clarifying and for clarity. So the 2000, too many pieces of paper here. The 2006, what was asked, can you just explain the difference between rules and regulations and the actual bylaw and where the authority lies? Because I think there's some confusion there, and I know there's been confusion in the past on different things as well, so.
There has, and people do misconstrue rules and regulations in public sector to be bylaws. And unless they are actually in the general bylaw section, they are not bylaws, which is a higher level of local government regulation. A rule and regulation is something that any administrative agency can promulgate. The word promulgate is under administrative law, and it basically means that they have the rulemaking authority to conduct the affairs of their committee or their commission in the day-to-day operation. So it was misconstrued in many cases that what were rules and regulations of the park, or rather the Recreation Commission, which they would have a right to do, consistent with their authority, limited by their authority, they are not bylaws. They are simply rules and regulations, which is a lesser included authority, lesser than a bylaw and much less than a state statute. So that's basically the hierarchy of regulatory law.
Okay. I just want to clarify as well. I know that the Recreation Commission is here. Thank you for coming. I think this is a great discussion. But I want to say that the discussion point of having this isn't to take away any authority and for the Board of Selectmen to supersede on what you may or may not have done. I can speak for myself, and I believe I speak for probably the majority of the board here. The intent is you are part of the process. There's no way around that. Any other board or commission or committee or department in town has input. You would have input in the interview process, in my mind. You would have input in the recommendations. If you disagree with the recommendation that working with the personnel director, you have the right to come before this board makes any decisions, and say your piece. This isn't shutting anyone out of this process. This is an open process, and you're an integral part of what we plan to do in getting the best director that we can, based on the statute and what's allowed. So I just want to say that because I don't want you to feel that the question being asked or anything is trying to take anything away from you. Your value is very important. For me, the day-to-day operations, more or less, fall under the Recreation Commission. It's not like I would imagine that somebody's going to come to us with a question on administrative and organizational issues. That wouldn't change. For me, personally, it's more if there's an issue or there's a question, a hiring, a firing, a disciplinary issue, or anything along those lines, that's where it would fall more under the Board of Selectmen. And again, I can't speak for the board, but that's where I interpret and see this going. It's not about taking anything away. And I hope you realize that, and I do appreciate you being here for us to have this conversation. That being said, questions and comments for the board? Mrs. Fanoff.
I agree with what you just stated, Mrs. Braccio. I was involved in 2002 and 2006. And over the years, I've seen where employment laws have changed, responsibilities have changed, and I agree with Lisa. In no way is this to take the responsibility away from the right candidate that can work with your commission. I think there's a level of responsibility now that we all need to adhere to and be responsible to and work together to get to the ultimate goal of what we want to achieve as a community.
Mr.
I think that's a
Clement.
great point. I mean, obviously, we have to follow the law, and if we didn't do that, can you imagine the problems associated with it? So we'll follow, my strong suggestion is we follow the guidance of town council. We actively solicit and receive the input of the commission, and that's clearly going to be needed. They are the experts in the area, and I, for one, look forward to their advice.
So I guess the only question I would ask is, the way that the rules and regulations are written currently, the statement, or Article 3, the commission shall hire a director of recreation who shall manage all department functions and staff. So is the conclusion then that statement is really in conflict with?
No, you have to,
General
no,
law,
I'm sorry, you have to make it, it has to complement itself.
Yep.
State statute always talks, and local bylaw, always talks about appointment or appointing authority. It doesn't reference hiring. If you go to a statute, it doesn't say that a board of selectmen will hire, or a mayor will hire. A mayor shall appoint, a town council, rather, a city council or a town council shall appoint, or whatever it might be. I would view that, and I looked at the entire aspect of this, that you have an appointing authority. You have the power to appoint under the statute based upon your power to appoint the commissioners, but the process of hiring, of carrying that forth, would still be vested in the Recreation Commission, together with all the other authority, which is substantial in regulating recreational grounds and all of the things I just recently indicated. So it's not a division of authority, it's got to be complementary. And the complementary is that they come to you with recommendations, with suggestions on employment, and then you review it, you ask your questions in public, then you take whatever action you think is appropriate to appoint, and then the commission carries forth all of that, based upon whatever their recommendations were, to ensure that these individuals are hired with certain conditions, or whatever it might be, consistent with the other laws of the town. So, no, I don't see the conflict. I think you have to read the two aspects of it, appointment and then the actual hiring after the appointment, in conjunction with what state law is. And state law, the power of appointment is the predominant power to get somebody into a position of local government.
And I would just like to add as well that this is kind of new territory to a degree. Doreen's been here a long time, and it's been a long time since we've had to have these discussions. And once again, Doreen, thank you for all your dedication. If the board would be willing, I would be happy to sit down with Mr. Purple, the Chair of Recreation, and maybe put a process down on paper so there's a level of comfort that you won't be excluded from the process, that there'll be value in the recommendations that you also take part in giving. I don't know that we need to go that far, but being a process person, and I love to see things written down, I'm happy to coordinate that if the board thinks that would be helpful in any way. Thoughts on that?
It sounds helpful, but I'd be curious if there's any questions from the chair.
I was going to go there
of
next.
Recreation.
Yep. I was going to go there next. So, Kristen, if you would like to step forward.
And two of our members can listen.
No, that's fine.
I'll try to keep it simple. I mean, I think our request is, and Attorney Cipriano did summarize some of the fact-finding we were able to do on our own. I will stress that, the actual opinion that came out lacked most of that history in detail. So we did go out on our own and found some of that history that led to some questions and that we presented to you and Mr. Cipriano shared tonight. I think we'd still like to request additional, just on behalf of the town, some additional understanding of past history. So elaborating, I guess, on what Attorney Cipriano shared tonight in regards to Chapter 45 and applicability, because I think it's just very important. When we look at some of these, it raises more questions for us that perhaps we should get together and go through separately. We've had others review a lot of these documents beyond ourselves with probably expertise better than ours on this stuff, and our lawyer, that's for sure. That seems to raise legitimate questions, or at least suggest that it's worth diving further into this topic and truly making sure that Chapter 45 is understood, and that the Recreation Commission's role as well, because again, there's specific areas in here where we raised some questions. A few was things like the fact that our initial research, and I'll say initial research, right? It's not all complete. This was done, in a limited amount of time. In 1967, it appears that actual bylaws were approved by town council. So at what point, how official was that? And at what point were the bylaws moved to rules and regulations? And what's the process for doing so? And does a bylaw carry more weight perhaps than rules and regulations? Another area of interest was that, again, in 2006, when the bylaws were put forward and changed to rules and regulations, and specifically there was comments on Article 3 by town council, and Article 3 again stated that the commission shall hire a director of recreation who shall manage all departments, functions, and staff. The suggestion, the only comment made at that point by town council was that no suggested change as it relates to the director of recreation. But of course, the hiring is subject to the town meeting appropriation and must be consistent with the salary administrative plan. So our question there is just.
Well, he's here,
Okay.
actually, if you
Sure.
would like to.
Yeah,
it's-
I think I've answered that by saying that we were reviewing something as to its form. And I'll also say to you that I don't believe that whatever happened in 1967 was a bylaw. I think that, again, was rules and regulations. But our review in 2006 was as to form, and we reviewed it in the context of what was said. And in our opinion, nothing would change once the selectmen appoint then the hiring would have to be something that, the details of the hiring could be something that the commission could manage on a regular basis. So they're consistent, they're not inconsistent. It's just that in 2018, we were asked to specifically focus on appointment authority, which was the first time we had heard that issue. And in reviewing that, I gave you the analysis. The most important point, it can't be refuted, and that is that under state statute, it says nothing about the ability to appoint for a recreation commission, but in Chapter 45, Section 5, for a park commission, it gives substantial authority for appointment. So if one is missing and one is there, then there's a legislative intent not to have that authority respectfully to the Recreation Commission. That's statutory interpretation. No lawyer, I think, could disagree with that. That's my point.
And
you
last, again, our question still remains there, why some of that detail wouldn't, appreciating the response, it's still, seems surprising that it did not come out in that form in Article 3 back in 2006. So again, just looking to understand what was the intent of the town and the board at that point in time. And the fact that the past commissions have not been selected in that manner. We all want to be collaborative on this process, don't get me wrong, but we also want to make sure that there's a full understanding and everyone's comfortable with the history of this, and then if changes are going to take place, why they are taking place. And so therefore, we think just some more time, perhaps, and even just, because this question will come up again. So at least maybe then further documenting the complete history of this, understanding it, allowing others to reflect before making any final decisions. I understand we'll be involved in the process. We don't, we know that you would absolutely listen and consider, but there are some changes. The final recommendation would come from town administrator. It would not come from the Recreation Commission. I mean, there are some changes to the process that have been communicated to me to date in terms of what would happen next in terms of hiring the director. But first and foremost, we want to understand, the history with the bylaw, et cetera. Make sure that it's documented so others can understand that as well. There's clarity moving forward. And then beyond that, to your point, being very clear on the process that will take place over the coming months with Doreen.
And I wasn't here in 2006, so I can't speak to that process. And I'm not going to put Mrs. Faniff on the spot to share her recollections of what may or may not have transpired in that process. I think probably the most fruitful thing to do going forward is if there are specific questions you have, I think my impression from the board is that as the appointing authority, as town council has said, the rules and regulations do not supersede what the statute allows. So I think the most fruitful thing going forward, knowing we're all going to work together and we have every intention of working together, would be if you have specific questions, a Recreation Commission has specific questions, not so much a timeline, but actually specific questions that you would like to see answered. If you could forward those to Mr. Purple, we can forward them on to town council. We can have a discussion on this. It's not like you're hiring or appointing anybody tomorrow. I mean, we have time to do this at a comfort level for everyone. And I think that's the intent of this board, is to work together and find the best way to do this within the statute. So if you could do that for us and put together a list, Kristen.
Yep.
And you, by all means, you can still continue and ask your questions as well. I'm not trying to stop you from speaking.
I think that's what we're looking to do, that we'd like to continue the discussion.
Absolutely.
There's gaps in understanding what was a bylaw, what wasn't a bylaw, that we'd like to just understand better. And so we can absolutely detail those out.
Yep, and then, we can get them answered, and then we can meet again. I mean, this won't be the last meeting or discussion on this. I'd be happy to bring you guys back and have another discussion on this. And just, again, so we're all on the same page at the end of the day. That's how the town gets benefited the best. So,
Absolutely.
thank you.
Thanks.
Mr. Schifrin?
I'm trying something new.
There is a material difference between appointing and hiring, correct?
That's a question to me?
Yeah.
Yes, under state statute, yes.
Yeah, I think that is missing in the article. This board avoids the recommended iron.
Under Article 3?
Yeah.
Well, I think that's what Kristen's asking for, too, is further clarification on hiring versus appointing.
Yeah.
This board appoints. That the Rec Commission hires.
Yes.
Yeah.
In other words, the appointing power, which is what's recognized under state statute and bylaws, who appoints who? It's always, it doesn't reference hiring, it references the appointment. That's the official ministerial act, or the administrative act, that gives the position to an individual. I view the hiring process to be, once appointed, the details of the hiring are left to the commission, who's best knowledgeable about what they should be. Either they will make recommendations to you and say, you know, we recommend the appointment of Mary Smith to this position, and we would suggest that the conditions of employment be as follows, and you say we hereby appoint, and we defer to you to carry forth the details of the hiring of this individual, whether in conjunction with the town administrator or whomever. But it goes, because this board, respectfully, does not have the authority to understand the day-to-day workings of a recreation commission. That's why they have statutory authority clearly delineated. That's also why, in 2002, when there was a concern about an ad hoc committee respectfully usurping recreation commission authority, I was asked to analyze it, and I concluded that, with all due respect to that ad hoc committee, they were attempting to, either intentionally or unintentionally, usurp authority, and it couldn't happen. So I said, no, they're beyond the scope of their authority. That authority rests with the Recreation Commission. So around the whole issue of appointment remains substantial statutory authority, restated in the bylaw, as 45, Section 14, that the commission has much authority as it relates to all of the matters that we discussed and what are in the actual statute. Nothing changes, and respectfully, a Board of Selectmen cannot interfere with those aspects of it unless it's the question of a warrant article or appointment or whatever. I hope that explains it a little better.
If I may just give a little background here.
Yes, please.
I mean, I think the discussion started back in 2002, originally, and I worked with the chair at that time. There was a change in the leadership in recreation. There was an internal candidate, so the candidate already was working for the Recreation Department, and it was recommended to the Board of Selectmen to appoint that person. So it's back to what Town Council is saying, but we had the candidate already in place as far as the commission at that time, and that's how it worked. Same thing, but the candidate was already working for the town in the position.
So again, we'll document our questions. I do think, just speaking with the commission, that clarification of hiring versus appointing authority and the order in which that happens, and the roles and responsibilities in the hiring of the commission and the interviewing process, and then the final recommendation that's made to the board, those are the types of things that we are interested in kind of going into more detail. And so I agree with your point. We can continue the discussion. We'll kind of, based on this feedback, document our next round of questions and provide them to you. Sorry it was not earlier. It's just the holidays kind of made it hard to get all of this pulled together, but
No, that's fine, and we all appreciate you taking the time over the holidays to do this, and again, we all want to do the right thing,
Right.
so,
okay.
Thank
Thanks very
you.
much.
When do you plan on meeting, though, so that we don't drag this out? Madam Chair, do you have a time frame that you'd like to start these conversations? Since they're looking for a candidate? maybe?
well, we have our budget meeting on the 10th, and our meeting after that is the 15th. I don't know with all the meetings going on, if that's something we could at least have the questions, and then maybe have you back at our first meeting in February? And then maybe we could have, the discussion, and we'll have the answer to some of the questions that they have. I think that would be,
All right, so the questions will go to town council as
yes,
well?
yes.
So if you have questions, get them in.
Yeah, if we could do it by the 15th, then for our first meeting in February, that gives time for council to be able to respond. All right, that leads to appointment of up to 2 members of the Board of Selectmen representatives to volunteer for the Master Plan Committee. And as it usually goes, when a member leaves, no, just kidding, is there, yeah, I know, exactly. Is there any volunteers? We'll start there.
I'll volunteer.
Okay, so Mrs. Faniff will volunteer. And I think I nominate Mr. Kalenda to volunteer. But if he's unavailable, then I will fill that seat. How's that? We'll leave the option to him.
It's fine.
That was done to me, so.
Could we also ask the planning board to consider a Trails Committee member? I don't believe it was on their list, just for them to consider it.
Absolutely, and seeing as Ms. Luttrell is sitting in the audience here. It's considered. I like that, quick questions answered. So, yep. So do we have a motion to appoint 2 members of the Board of Selectmen to volunteer for the Master Plan Committee, Mrs. Faniff and Mr. Kalenda, if he is available? If not, Ms. Braccio.
So moved.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, and that being said, I think we've covered everything as we jumped around on the agenda. Do we have a motion?
Town Administrator's report.
Oh, excuse me,
Executive
Mr.
session.
Purple, Town Administrator's Report. Bad me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be brief. Just as a reminder, we do have a budget meeting, and that's the only item on the agenda on January 10th. The finance team has been working with the departments to come up with a recommended budget. We will, as Mrs. Faniff, I believe, had requested, ensure that we have a list of those departments or boards or committees that do not agree. And we'll ensure that everyone is invited to the meeting so that there can be a robust discussion of the budget recommendation, and then those things which may not be included in the FY20 budget, to see what the board may want to do from there. The only other item I have is that we, as the board had directed, we're continuing to explore all avenues in terms of this economic development coordinator position. I did have a brief conversation with the chair, John Wood, and at this point, any of these avenues that we're taking a look at probably would not come to fruition at least until sometime in February. As the board is aware, I believe we have had Claire Reynolds working under a contract to temporarily perform the duties of the position. She has been doing them under the same, I guess, level of obligation and pay that we were receiving from CMRPC when we contracted with that entity for the services. And Mr. Wood had asked, and I thought it was a good idea, but the contract extensions have run out on the original contract, and if the board had any objections to entering into an additional 30 days for Ms. Reynolds to continue in the position temporarily until we validate some of these avenues as to how we're going to move forward with the position. It would be for the same existing pay, and it would be under the same hour structure that CMRPC was, which was essentially 10 hours a week, so that it's not going to impact our ability to hire a part-time employee, or we're not going to leave ourselves shortchanged when we do move forward with the position. So I just want to get the board's assent on that, if you have some other thoughts.
I am fine with going forward with this for a 30-day extension until, as you said, we advertise or pursue the other options we discussed at a prior meeting.
I agree.
Okay.
A follow-up question to the budget
Sure.
meeting, January 10th. Do we have a time?
6:30.
6:30. Another follow-up question. There have been presentations made to the advisory board by departments.
So.
Are we going to see the presentations? Are we going to get the same document? I saw Recreation, they did a great job.
So advisory has seen presentations from some of the departments that they've requested. They have not requested all departments. Usually it's the bigger departments and then some of the smaller ones, depending on things that may or may not be in that budget. And the finance team tries to give advisory some advice on which ones they should see in. The budgets that advisory has looked at have been the original submissions. So advisory has not had the ability to review what the recommended budget is coming forward. It's a little bit of, and I was talking with the chair about this, it's a little bit of a sticky situation. Advisory is meeting on the 8th. You were meeting on the 10th. The recommended budget is coming before you on the 10th. So, while Brian and I may have some global discussions with advisory on the 8th, it is not going to be to the level of detail that you will be seeing on the 10th. It's your budget. You should be seeing it first. Advisory is invited to attend the meeting, and then obviously, once you've made a recommendation for your budget, that will then carry forward to advisory for their continued review and recommendation.
But if there's a difference between the finance team and the department, commission, or boards, are we prepared with the time that we have also to see their presentations to show the disagreement? That's what I'm trying to find out.
Yes, yeah, there is that, and I think that's why the board, and maybe I'm wrong, but in my mind, that's why the board wanted this to be
Yes.
the only item on that evening.
Right.
Mr. Ballantyne's presentation, along with me, is probably going to be no more than 20 minutes.
Okay.
And then I think that we open up to discussion, deliberation. Those groups that don't agree with the budget. Again, this was a year, and I think Mr. Ballantyne said this at the last meeting, this was a year when some departments and some boards and committees were saying, well, we don't have a budget, we want a budget. It's not a lot of money, and in some cases, it's not a lot of money, until you put them all together. Then it makes a position.
All right, if there's background support information, then my expectation is whatever that support information is reflective of the numbers that you're giving to this board that evening.
Correct.
Okay.
I'm just articulating, advisory's meeting on the 8th, you're meeting on the 10th. You will have a level of detail advisory will not yet, unless you tell me differently. It is your budget to develop and then provide to advisory for them to recommend and opine on. So I think that this board should have the information first, unless.
Well, I agree.
Okay, all right, I just want to check.
But if there's background information that we need, I also
Absolutely.
want that.
Yes.
Okay.
Agreed. Any further budget questions for Mr. Purple? To the board?
Yeah, is that possible to ask my question? I don't know where else to ask.
Well,
Yeah.
I know
What about this?
it's not on the agenda. I know that's where, because it was town administrator's report. It's, sorry.
It came up as a result of what he just said.
Regarding a disagreement of a budget? Correct.
She needs a microphone.
Yeah,
She's got-
Betsy, you have to come to a microphone.
I'm just confused.
My expectation is, yes, if there's a discrepancy between what's being prepared for this board for the July 10th meeting.
January 10th.
I'm sorry, January. I'm looking for summer already.
Betsy Rosalem, Chair of the Personnel Board. How would I know if there was a discrepancy as of January 9th?
So
Will you
once-
tell the boards?
So once the recommended budget is all set, hopefully in the next day or so, Mr. Ballantyne will be sending out an email with information to all the boards, committees, departments that, again, based on conversations that have been had, this is your number, this is where you are, you're very much invited to come to the meeting on the 10th. I would expect this room to be full.
Okay,
And then it'd be the opportunity for people to stand up and say, we support the recommended budget, or, you know, we have some issues with it, and there are things that we think we would like to see funded.
thank you very much, Mr. Purple. I just, and I thank you
That
for
was-
your indulgence.
That was a process question, so that, I like process questions, so,
Thank you
thank you.
to the board. Thank you, Mr. Purple.
Thank you. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
We're going into executive session.
I'm sorry, there is no executive session for tonight.
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.